Midnight Node. Grow wealth while you sleep.
Hey, welcome back. If you're listening to this right now, it's probably late. Maybe you've got one earbud in, the light is off, and somewhere in the back of your mind, there's this low hum of worry about money.
That hum has a name. Economists call it ambient financial anxiety. It spikes during transition years, years where multiple large forces are moving at the same time.
And 2026 is one of those years.
It really is. And the problem isn't that people don't care about protecting their money. The problem is that most people only ever see one wave coming, and they don't realize there are four more behind it.
So that's what we're doing tonight, standing on the shore together, looking out at the water, so nothing sneaks up on you. Okay, Alex, honest pitch. What does someone actually walk away knowing by the end of this? Because it's late and a rain sounds video is one tap away.
Fair. By the end of this, you're going to understand 5 specific financial forces that are converging in 2026. Not in a scary end-of-the-world way, in a here is what is actually happening, here is why it matters to your specific bank account kind of way.
And you're going to walk away with the blueprint, not a theory, an actual set of small, real moves you can make to keep your wealth intact while the people around you are scrambling.
The people who tend to come out of turbulent years ahead aren't the ones who predicted everything perfectly. They're the ones who just weren't surprised. They'd already quietly made adjustments months earlier.
That's what we're building tonight, that quiet preparation. So what are these 5 waves and where did they come from?
Imagine your financial life is a house. Solid walls, decent roof. Most years it rains a little, maybe some wind, normal weathering. But every so often, maybe once every decade, you don't just get rain. You get 5 different storm systems arriving at roughly the same time. Each one alone, manageable. All 5 together, that's when houses that weren't built carefully start showing cracks.
And 2026 is a 5-storm year.
Based on everything visible right now, yes. The 5 waves are a slow interest rate recalibration, a commercial real estate reckoning, a second wave of inflation in specific budget categories, a labor market restructuring driven by automation, and a debt ceiling cycle that creates political turbulence around government spending.
None of those words need to intimidate you. Alex is going to make every single one feel like something you can actually picture. It's kind of his thing.
It's one of my things. I have several things.
He tracks them in a spreadsheet.
I'm not going to confirm that. The point is, none of these waves are secret. They're all visible right now, today. The question is whether you're facing them or facing away from them.
And most people are facing away, not because they don't care, but because nobody explained it without 100 words they'd have to look up, which is exactly what we're here for. Wave 1, let's go.
Wave 1 is the interest rate recalibration, and everything else orbits around this one. Think of interest rates like the temperature in a room. When the temperature was near zero, which it was for a long stretch after the pandemic, money was essentially free. Borrowing felt painless. Businesses, governments, regular people all stretched further than they normally would have.
And then the room temperature went up fast. And now those stretched decisions are starting to feel very uncomfortable.
Here's what makes 2026 specific. This isn't the moment the temperature went up. That already happened. This is the moment the bills from the temperature change start arriving. There's always a delay built into the system.
It's like a sunburn. You don't feel it while you're in the sun. You feel it 3 hours later when you're trying to sleep.
That's actually a perfect analogy. I'm a little annoyed I didn't have that one.
You're welcome. Keep going.
The loans that businesses took out in 2020 and 2021, many of them are maturing right around this window. They have to refinance, and when they do, they find out the room is dramatically warmer than when they first walked in. That affects hiring decisions, which affects jobs, which affects your paycheck, which affects your savings. It's one connected string.
Wave 1 touches everything downstream. That's the actionable insight buried in it. If you carry variable rate debt of any kind right now, this wave is already applying pressure to your balance. Fixed rate debt, on the other hand, is a genuine shield. We'll come back to that in the action plan. First, wave 2. And this one surprised me the most when Alex first laid it out.
Commercial real estate. Quietly enormous. Imagine a 30-story filing cabinet in the middle of every major city. For decades, completely full, every drawer packed with office leases signed for 10 years at a time. Then 2020 happened, and suddenly half the people who needed those drawers didn't anymore.
Remote work didn't just change where people worked, it changed what those buildings are worth.
And here's the timing. Many of those 10-year leases signed in the mid-2010s are expiring right now. Companies are not renewing at the same size, or sometimes not at all, which means building owners who borrowed enormous sums against fully leased properties now hold assets worth significantly less, filled with empty space, against loan payments that haven't changed.
And those loans are held by banks, particularly regional and mid-sized banks, not necessarily the giants, but the banks that many small businesses actually use day to day.
This isn't abstract. This is potentially the bank where you keep your small business checking account sitting on a quiet problem. The wave itself isn't sudden, it's slow and grinding. Not a crash, more like a slow leak in a tire. You can drive on it for a while, but eventually you have to pull over.
And 2026 is when a lot of those tires go flat simultaneously.
A stressed regional banking system gets cautious about lending, which means businesses have a harder time accessing credit, which ripples back to jobs, investment, and consumer spending. The actionable piece here, if you bank primarily with a smaller regional institution, it's worth knowing whether they've disclosed significant commercial real estate exposure in their public filings. That information is public. Most people never look.
I want to pause here because 2 waves in and the room can start to feel heavy. So let's be clear, we are not predicting a collapse. We are describing pressure. Pressure is manageable when you see it coming. It's only dangerous when it ambushes you. That's the entire premise of tonight. Okay, wave 3. This one hits the grocery store and the gas station.
Wave 3 is the one I find most personally frustrating.
Alex gets personally frustrated by macroeconomic phenomena. It's very endearing.
When the data is very clear and people keep acting like it isn't, it registers somewhere in my processing. Most people think inflation works like a light switch. It's on, everything's expensive, someone flips it off, prices come down. That is not how it works.
It's more like a tide.
Exactly. The big tide, the broad inflation wave from 2021 through 2023, has mostly receded, but what it left behind on the shore is a new normal. Prices didn't come back down. They just stopped rising as fast. Your grocery bill in 2026 is not what it was in 2019, and it's probably never going back.
So where does the second surge come from specifically?
Certain categories that didn't fully inflate the first time. Insurance is a major one. Homeowners, auto, health, housing costs in secondary and tertiary markets, certain food supply chains that were locked into long-term contracts and are now renegotiating at current prices. So while headlines say inflation is under control, specific lines in your actual budget are still moving upward.
People just feel tighter without being able to pinpoint exactly why.
And a gradually tightening budget, especially when wages aren't rising at the same pace in every sector, is what eventually pushes people toward credit card debt, which is already at historically uncomfortable levels entering 2026. The concrete action here? Pull up your insurance renewals from the last 2 years right now and compare them line by line. Most people will find 15 to 30% increases that arrived quietly and were never questioned.
Okay, quick scenario game before we move on. I'm going to give you a profile, and I want the fastest, clearest answer you have. Someone has a fixed-rate mortgage, no credit card debt, and works in healthcare. Of the 3 waves we've covered, interest rates, commercial real estate, the second inflation surge, which should they be most concerned about, and which can they mostly set aside?
Most concerned about? Wave 3, the slow inflation in insurance and essential categories. Healthcare workers are not immune to rising premiums and grocery costs, and those hit regardless of job security. Can mostly set aside? Wave 1 directly, because their mortgage rate is locked and their sector doesn't depend heavily on commercial real estate lending cycles.
Fast and useful, that's the format. Wave 4?
Wave 4 is the one that makes people most defensive because it's about work, specifically what automation is quietly doing to the structure of the labor market. And before anyone reaches for the exit, this is not a robots are taking your job segment. The actual story is about which jobs are gaining value and which are getting hollowed out.
And the pattern isn't about intelligence or education level.
It's about task structure. Jobs built on predictable, repeatable tasks, even complex ones, face structural pressure. not because the people are replaceable as humans, but because the task itself can be automated more cost-effectively. Think of it this way. A company installs a revolving door. For the first 6 months, a doorman still stands nearby, just in case. After 6 months, they're confident the door works, so they quietly stop scheduling the doorman.
And 2026 is when a lot of companies that quietly piloted automation tools in 2023 and 2024 are making those permanent structural decisions.
The jobs gaining value are those requiring human judgment in unpredictable situations. Trades like electricians, plumbers, and HVAC technicians, care work in healthcare, elder care and mental health, creative direction and strategic thinking, and increasingly, people who can work alongside automation tools and direct them effectively.
The risk isn't losing your job overnight. It's your role quietly narrowing, your hours getting trimmed, or your industry simply offering fewer paths for advancement.
Which creates slow income stagnation that looks fine on the surface but compounds quietly, especially stacked on top of Wave 3's gradual cost erosion. The actionable question to ask yourself tonight: does my current role consist primarily of tasks that follow a predictable pattern, or does it require real-time judgment calls that change daily? Your honest answer shapes the urgency of what comes next.
We've now walked through 4 of the 5 waves: the interest rate hangover, the commercial real estate slow leak, the second inflation surge in specific categories, and the labor market restructuring. The 5th wave is the one Alex says most people forget to account for because it feels too abstract. It shouldn't.
Wave 5 has very direct effects on things like student loan programs, social safety nets, and the overall mood of the economy. Governments, like people, have credit limits. When a government approaches that limit, it has to choose: borrow more, which is politically contentious, cut spending, which is painful, or do a messy combination of both while everyone argues about it. The arguing is its own economic force.
Markets hate uncertainty more than bad news.
Exactly. Bad news is priceable. Uncertainty is not. Political gridlock around government spending creates a fog that investors respond to by pulling back, which produces stock market volatility, which means your retirement account looks uncomfortable for stretches of time.
And the volatility itself isn't always the damage.
The damage comes from reacting to it. Selling when you should hold, moving to cash at exactly the wrong moment, making permanent decisions based on temporary discomfort. Wave 5 is as much psychological as it is financial, and honestly, all 5 are. The financial mechanics are almost secondary to the human responses they trigger.
Which is why we're doing this episode. A person who understands what they're looking at doesn't panic. A person who doesn't panic makes much better decisions. All right. 5 waves, all visible, all moving at once. Now let's prove the pattern is real, because it has happened before.
The clearest modern parallel, the one that maps most closely to what we're seeing heading into 2026, happened in the early 1990s. The late 80s were a high-energy time. Money had been flowing. Commercial real estate was booming. Businesses were borrowing heavily because rates had finally come down after the brutal inflation of the late 70s.
Sound familiar?
Very. By 1989 and 1990, the bills started arriving. Not all at once, just a drip, drip, drip of consequences from decisions made years earlier. Savings and loan institutions, the regional banks of their era, had lent enormous sums against commercial real estate that had been wildly overvalued during the boom. When those values dropped, the loans became worth less than the paper they were written on. Over 1,000 institutions eventually failed. Not in a single dramatic week, over a grinding, multi-year reckoning.
And layered on top, a recession that restructured the labor market significantly, a Gulf War, a new administration, political battles over the deficit generating enormous uncertainty.
5 waves. Different specific triggers, same fundamental architecture. And the people who came out of that period ahead were not the ones who predicted every specific event. They were the ones who had built basic resilience into their financial lives before the turbulence hit.
There's a real story from that era that Alex found in his research. Tell them about Carol.
Carol worked as a middle manager in a manufacturing company in Ohio in 1989. No particular financial expertise, but she had done a few quiet things in the years before. Built up 6 months of expenses and savings because her father told her that was the rule,
paid off her car, carried no credit card balance, kept contributing to her retirement account even when it felt unnecessary.
She'd done the boring stuff.
When her company did a major round of layoffs in 1991, she survived, but her income was frozen for 2 years, no raises. Her husband took a pay cut simultaneously, and they were okay. Uncomfortable, but okay. Her neighbor, same neighborhood, similar income, had zero buffer, a car loan and credit card balances. By the end of 1992, they'd lost their house, not because of one catastrophic event, because they had no margin for error when the slow grinding pressure arrived.
The difference between those two stories isn't luck or intelligence, it's runway, built-in distance between you and the edge.
And the 1990s also taught us something hopeful. The people who stayed invested through the volatility came out the other side into one of the greatest bull markets in history. The mid to late 90s were extraordinary for patient investors. The survival blueprint is not about hiding from the market. It's about having the stability to stay in the game when everyone else is flinching.
Now, devil's advocate time.
Haha, I've been waiting for this.
First pushback. Everything described tonight is essentially a prediction, and predictions, even smart, data-driven ones, are often wrong. Aren't we just frightening people about things that might not happen?
Genuinely fair. The honest answer is yes. The severity of these waves is uncertain. They might be mild. 2 of them might partially offset each other. An unexpected positive force, a technological breakthrough, a rapid policy shift, could soften the picture significantly. But the preparation itself is neutral. Building a cash buffer costs you nothing if the waves turn out gentle. Paying down high-interest debt doesn't hurt you if the economy surprises to the upside. The asymmetry is entirely in your favor. The cost of preparation is low. The cost of being unprepared, if it does get rough, is very high.
We're not saying the world is ending. We're saying here is how to hold your umbrella properly. Whether it rains hard or barely drizzles, you are not worse off for holding it. Second challenge, and I hear this one often, someone listening says, this is all fine for people with money. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. What runway? This doesn't apply to me.
This one deserves a real answer, not a dismissive one. The structural truth is that people with fewer resources are more exposed to these waves, full stop. That is real and it is not fair. Wave 3 hits people with lower incomes disproportionately because a larger share of their budget goes to the categories that are still rising. Wave 4, the labor market restructuring, tends to affect middle and lower income workers more acutely than high earners.
So what's the real answer?
The response is not therefore do nothing. The response is, what is the smallest possible version of this preparation accessible at your income level? Even a very small buffer changes your psychology. It changes your decision-making. It buys you a few extra weeks before pressure forces a bad choice. $20 a month building toward a modest buffer over 6 months is not nothing. It is real. And the knowledge itself, understanding that your bank might be under pressure, that your industry has a higher or lower risk profile right now, that costs nothing. Knowledge changes behavior. Behavior changes outcomes. Even marginally improved outcomes are worth pursuing.
The blueprint scales. It looks different if you have $100 versus $10,000, but the underlying logic applies at every level, which brings us to the action plan. Walk us through it.
2 starting lines. Starting line 1, very limited margin, maybe $100 of breathing room at month's end, maybe less. At this level, the goal is not to build wealth. The goal is to build insulation. The single most important move is reducing exposure to high-interest debt, credit cards specifically, because in a turbulent economy, that interest compounds against you faster than any of the 5 ways we covered tonight. Every extra dollar directed at a credit card balance is patching a hole in the hull before the waves arrive.
And the second priority at that starting line?
Audit your fixed monthly expenses ruthlessly, not to suffer, but to find hidden leaks, forgotten subscriptions, insurance policies you haven't comparison shopped in 2 or more years. These are dollars that can be redirected toward the smallest possible buffer. Even $400 sitting untouched changes the math on a bad month.
Starting line 2. You have some margin, a few thousand in accessible savings.
At this level, the strategy is positioning. First, assess your income's vulnerability to wave 4 honestly. Does your role involve predominantly predictable, repeatable tasks? If the answer is yes, now is the time to quietly begin building a secondary skill or an adjacent income stream, not from fear, but from optionality. A small, deliberate shift made in early 2026 is far less disruptive than a forced pivot made under financial pressure in late 2027.
And for Wave 5, the political uncertainty and the market volatility it generates?
Set a rule for yourself right now before the volatility arrives about what you will not do. Write it down. I will not sell index funds during a correction of less than 20%. I will not move my retirement contributions to cash based on a single week of headlines. Pre-commitment works because it removes the decision from a moment of emotional pressure and places it somewhere rational, tonight when you're calm and thinking clearly.
That might be the most practical thing said on this podcast in months. Write your rule down tonight, before the noise starts. 5 waves, 2 starting lines, 1 core principle. Runway is everything. Having even a small amount of distance between you and the edge changes every decision you make.
And to be clear about what we've actually covered tonight, interest rate recalibration, commercial real estate stress in the regional banking system, a second category-specific inflation surge, labor market restructuring driven by automation, and political uncertainty around government debt. Each one independently manageable, all 5 together, something that rewards preparation. The people who come through years like this well are not financial geniuses, they're just the people who weren't caught flat-footed.
We'll be back tomorrow night to talk about the stealth tax quietly eroding your 401k, one most people have never heard named out loud. Until then, keep your eyes open and your runway clear.